Ladies and gentlemen, it's such a beautiful day. It's such a beautiful time to be alive. And I've brought to the show a beautiful guest who's going to give you some beautiful insight, at least in my opinion. And I think to those listening, you're going to be really thankful. So we have today Jason Burdge. He's the founder of the Psilocybin Assisted Therapy Association, also a nonprofit consultant who's targeting psychedelic mental health. He has a long history in the world of nonprofits. He's used to be the executive director and founder of Stride, managing director of a Home Within, founder, executive director with Gift Horse. And we can talk about all those, but I just want people to understand that his roots are deep in the nonprofit world, because I think it's relevant to what we're going to talk about, what he has going on today with the Psilocybin Assisted Therapy Association. Jason, first off, thank you for being here today. How are you?
I'm doing great, and thank you for having me, George. This is awesome. I've been looking forward to this since our first interaction of just being like, oh, where's this going to go? And so many things to talk about. And so now here we are. Let's talk about it all.
Yeah, I agree. You know, before we got started, you and I were talking about different maps, and I think it's relevant to think about, you know, when you look at the old maps of history, there used to be like this giant kraken that would take down a ship, or like a giant whale or something. And it was this area that, from what I have read, it was a place where either the unknown or where you shouldn't go, or where there's something danger. And I think it's relevant because in today's world, this idea of mental health is kind of like that ship that the kraken was taking down, only now we're sailing over there. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that analogy of just, this is like, it is uncharted territory, but we have these ships that are already built, but then it's like, oh, well, can we do this? And there's like, yes, we can. Well, how do we do that? How do we know where we're going? Where are we going to set the sails, towards? And even in that concept of, of maps of, it's like scale, what level? Like dividing of countries, dividing of states, dividing of, counties and cities. But then it's like, but we're on the planet. And, we initially, when I started Psilocybin Assisted Therapy Association, PATA or PATA, if we want to be fancy about it, it was like, well, we're promoting the advancement of psilocybin assisted therapy. And then it was like, but it's to address the mental health crisis. And, I was like, oh, is it the nation's mental health crisis? And it's like, no, this is the national, it's an international crisis. And, this affects everywhere in all types of people, whether or not they look like you and I, or whether or not they're our age, it's just all of that. None of that matters. And so, it's that like, where do you want to go? And it's like, yes, we got to go there. And my big harp within the psychedelic industry, or big one of the soapboxes that I have many, is like, we get there by collaborating. It's not a race. And to truly have these impacts that we want, and that so many of the people that we talk with, it's let's work together. And that the answer, a lot of it is, like, yes, that could be the perfect option for you of all the, dynamics that are out there. And that's what's important. What's important for the people that could use these substances, and what do they need? And so it's like switching the gear to like, let's look at it from what they want, not necessarily where do we want to have to drive the ship to. It's like, where do they need the ship to come to? So where do we go with that? Yeah, so many topics. That's what I'm kind of like, where do we go? Where do we start?
Yeah, well, maybe we could start with what you do have this long relationship with nonprofits, and that seems to me to come from a place of wanting to help people. But maybe you can talk specifically about how PATA got, how you started that. Like, what was the motivation behind it, and what is it you seek to do with it?
Sure. Those are great. So I'll kind of like backstory, and then kind of, bring forward. What brought me to psilocybin and psychedelics is really addressing my own mental health issues and concerns. PTSD, anxiety, have dealt with depression, and have been using psilocybin to really to address that. And psilocybin's fun. It's it's an awesome substance to use. And my focus, besides when the first time I had it, I think I was like 19 or 20, entirely different context. And then fast forward, and here we are. talking about this, but from a therapeutic context. And so kind of then backtracking into my history, started off in law enforcement. That's where, much of my PTSD and, some of those, traumas that's, could be, a different topic, but also these are communities that need to serve, or first responders that deal with these issues that often get, underseen, and the power that these substances can have, especially in a therapeutic context. Yep. And then from there, I moved into the for-profit world. And it was, oh, this is what I'm supposed to do, right? Just go out there and let's, make as much money and let's, that course, which, hey, if that's for you, great. And I started to drift away from it. For a lot of what I was missing was the same thought of like, why did I go into law enforcement? Is that I wanted to help people. I wanted to be a part of making a difference. In that my personal metrics were not how much do I sell or how much can I get out. It's always, it's like I'm altruistic by nature. I love to give. And so I transitioned over into the nonprofit, kind of started off new. First job was with the San Francisco AIDS Foundation, worked with AIDS Lifecycle, developing money, raising money, expanding community. And then I ended up getting a master's degree in nonprofit administration. And what I wanted to really do was kind of like merge together. It's like, hey, business has a lot of sound principles. There's a lot of things you don't need to recreate, but it's different. Outcomes are different. So it's like, how could I adapt both of these, take this knowledge of, nonprofit, as well as these business understandings to really focus on how can nonprofits be successful and reach the goals? Because most of the time in nonprofits, you get these people with these fabulous ideas. They're like, hey, what I call is the talent. These people that come in and it's like, oh, I got this talent and I want to do something. And then they go after it, but they don't know about nonprofit. And it's like, why would you? Why would people know all of these things? So it was like, okay, you're the talent. Let me help you do this. It's like, do your thing. And then I'll help with the background. I'll help with growing it, offer the advice. And so kind of fine-tuned into more like consulting really around this. So I started to target like new to developing organizations, bringing organizations from small, over to over $1 million, organizations. So still small, but having an impact and really growing, because that first steps are the difficult ones,
right?
To get going, kind of like mental health, some of those first steps of really getting going, or even taking the psychedelics, and it's scary once you get through it. And then you're like, oh. So started to merge more into the mental health realm and started to really be more of a leader within mental health focused organizations, which mental health is very broad scoping. Right. That a lot of other things can fall underneath there without it being like sit down talk therapy, right? So and a lot of them were focused around alternative. Let's see, one of my other passions is helping foster youth. I've adopted 2 girls out of the foster care system when they were little, so it's a huge passion of mine. These are folks that also deal with trauma, and military veterans, and there's what a huge difference between combat veterans and former and current foster youth that have to deal with those challenges. Trauma based. So moving it forward, and then it was really that kind of like Lisa, who's the co-founder with Lisa Ritter. She's a licensed mental health counselor. And I started discussing our similarities. She's the talent, and she's, agrees on all this psilocybin approach. And it was like, hey, here I am. I love, psilocybin mental health. I know how to do this stuff. Let's merge it together and create this. So about a year and 8 months ago, we started the Psilocybin Assisted Therapy Association, and our primary goal out the gates, or whatever term, was we wanted to get information out there, and we wanted it to be free. And we've personally put in a lot of money, a lot of time to make these available, because part of my approach in the nonprofit world was, well, let's get something out there that people can use, and then we can start building off of there, instead of like waiting for something or waiting for somebody to just give us $1 million to move forward. And so it was like, hey, and around this time was when Measure 109 was coming through in Oregon, around Oregon Psilocybin Services. So it was a lot of education, but coming at it as like, a business hat and the therapy hat, and, challenging where they were at, kind of defined on around where we really settled on. It was like, we know we wanted to promote the advancement of psilocybin assisted therapy, and then settled on these pillars of like, what was missing was really this education and empowerment. And it's education and empowering all of us, consumers, users, therapists, guides, sitters, all of these amazing people. But it's all for the same goal of it's to help the client in their mental health. So how do we do that? And that's where, we came up with this free guidebook and these other resources to be like, hey, here's this free tool. And, starting to go off into broader issues of the nonprofit and the psychedelic industry and how is it being promoted and whatnot, is like, you have major players that have a ton of money and they can start to dictate, and we're not that. We're trying to also be the counter to that it's not as complex as you think. The stigmas around psychedelics, especially, we're, middle-aged men, grew up, on the tails of the war on drugs and those stigmas. And, I still have challenges talking about this stuff with my parents, so it's like, how do we deal with that? And so just getting back to kind of like, it's about collaboration. It's really changing it and moving it forward and knowing that direction. And I think that, as we is stronger as a community, that it's like, let's keep this in mind. It's like, who is this really about? This isn't about taking drugs. It's like, go, you can do it. Sure. Fine. Whatever, do whatever you want, as long as you're being safe and responsible. Hey, have at it. But the folks that need it the most, that's going to improve their quality of life, all of this, it's like, let's not mess it up. And this isn't about making money. This is about getting it out there for them. And what can we do to drive that forward? How do we support each other? How do we, you and I here, doing this, all of this, this is about changing, an impact on people's lives that really could be a turning point. And it's really scary at the same time. That's, all of this, it's the setting off into the, using our maps analogy, it's like setting off into the horizon and being like, all right, there goes the, the land. I hope we make it. Type thing. So
I think it's beautiful. And I love the idea of like the 3-pronged thesis you guys have of like education, empowering, and healing. I think that that's like a nice, it's almost, it's spiritual in nature, because it's like the Trinity, right? Like you have like the 3 different parts of it right there. And I think that psychedelics are a huge part of healing, and it's more than all of us coming together and healing someone. It's almost like it's almost like the psychedelics or the entheogens are giving people the tools to heal themselves. And that kind of goes against the model we've had of medicine for a long time. It's always been, hey, you need this intermediary to come in here and tell you what's wrong with you. You need this other person to give you some drugs. You need this other, you need all these things, which is a way of collaborating. But now it's a way of us just kind of holding space for each other and being like, okay, it's your turn. Jump in the middle there. What do you got to work on? It's interesting, right?
Yeah, totally. And it's, the stories that I'm a networker, I talk with people,
there
and
you go.
Just how, we all start with something that's really common, even though we may look different.
Yep.
We could present different ages, different orientations, whatever we want to be. But we have this common thing that really intersects. And that's really appealing, because it's like, wow, I talk to these people and it's like, I would never talk with you outside of this situation. But we have this common thing, and it's like, you could be, I'm very liberal. I live in Portland, Oregon. It's, one of these places, and I talk with people that are almost like on the opposite. And it's like, you and I would never have a conversation. And isn't it awesome that we're talking about this? Because that's that collaboration, and that's the power. And that is, and in that sense of kind of like, it grounds us into something. And I know for psilocybin, it's like, this is a natural thing, right? I live in the Pacific Northwest. I can go, in my backyard, and this stuff is out there, like
Right.
people go on these parties to go out in the wilderness, and it's like, what a beautiful thing. So it's like that same grounding back to earth. It's this grounding nature. The medical, system, like, yeah, it has huge flaws, and then it's, become this business, but then it's like, we've almost missed out on this thing that's been around. Right. And, they get back into the cave, they talk about how did intellect, advance, is that it could have been around these psychedelics and,
Absolutely.
fungi and, the mycelial network and all of these things. And it's like, gosh, the earth is so amazing. And another thing that it's like, you could go in there, but what I see is like all of these pieces are really more connected than what we see. Is that there's not, it's like, let's stop being siloed about this.
Right.
And what our ultimate purpose is, our goals, address the mental health crisis. Let people be productive members of society, whatever that means for them. It's like, hey, whatever you want to do, go for it. Be it. However you want to do it. Same with psychedelics. If you want to use it for, personal reasons or, going out and having fun, great. You'll probably get a lot out of that. You might get that, if it's ritualistic and you want to do something, with a shaman and in circles and all of that, it's great. If you want to do something in a structured environment with a medical, hey, that's great, because it's about what you want. If you feel educated, empowered.
So let me ask you this, because you do have a background in nonprofits, and I would call you an expert that you have so much experience in it. When you look at this space right here, you have a different perspective than I do, because I don't know anything about nonprofits, and I'm curious to get someone's opinion with the experience that you have. What do you see unique about this? And before you answer that, I want to draw an idea about the cannabis, because I think we could draw a parallel. If you look at what's happening to prices with cannabis in places where it's legalized, like it's almost been dropped to the rock bottom floor. And it's interesting how, whether it's through competition or whether it's through laws, whatever it is, it seems to me that these plant medicines and entheogens, like it's almost like they don't want to be sold for a profit. It's almost like it's unprofitable. And that you could argue that was some of the reasons why it didn't really blow up the last time around, is because people couldn't find a real way to monetize it. We see it today with people searching for patents or people searching for devices that can administer the drugs. And there's all these ways people are desperately trying to wrap their arms around it to make a profit. But you guys have decided to take this other approach, like this nonprofit approach. And that seems to be something that is harmonious with the way these things are being consumed. So maybe you could speak to that a little bit.
Sure. And one of the things in my consulting, or when I'm talking with people about how to, develop nonprofit, is that it's like, besides the literal, like, nonprofits, right. That is like, just wrap your head around. But that also doesn't mean you can't make money.
Right.
And it also doesn't mean that you can't make a really good wage. There are people within the nonprofit worlds that make, really good. There is a level when a nonprofit starts to grow and, you have a CEO making $450,000, that I would start to question, like, are you, really, like, you're, it's too far of a difference. But getting back down, that, that concept of profit, of like, well, at the end of the year, like, we don't get any of it. It goes back into it. And the smart business practices is, you don't have to have a profit at the end of the year. Utilize your services. It's like, pay your employees. Like, you can still do these things. Employees don't need to make under wages, as long as you're making a fair wage. Do these things that encourage everybody, break away from the thought that it's like, oh, you either have to be in it for money or you have to do all this work for free. And, I do a ton of work for free and I don't mind it. I can handle it. So it's like that change of a mentality. And the other thing is that, like, when you create a nonprofit, it's governed by the board. The board doesn't own it. It's owned by the community. And so when you create a nonprofit, you give it to the community, and then it's governed by some select individuals who run kind of like the direction, and then let the, staff kind of, run the day to day. Big mind switch of like, hey, I'm on boards, people are presidents, and it's like the president doesn't own it. They're just, somebody has to lead. But at the end of the day, it's like your board members are doing a lot more work than they're necessarily getting out of it. So that concept, and what I find it resonates within the psychedelic industry, particularly with psilocybin, is that this is another one of those things is like, it's out there. This is a natural thing. Like, you don't need to do anything to it. Like, you can literally, right?
Yeah.
However you want to get it, whatever those are, so it's that concept that I think really lends well to this as this industry goes, that, we're talking about something that is the communities, and even within, and I'm not an expert, within you start getting indigenous communities and tribes, there's certainly, like peyote is much more indigenous, oriented, and has, sacred, it's around, the Wichita people, Mexico, and, how they use it is about their society and where they're going. Psilocybin is different, which is another thing I like about that, in that, there's not an ownership of it. And even within the communities, and again, I'm not an expert, but it's like indigenous communities weren't about ownership, right? They weren't like, this is mine, no one else can use it. The challenges came from the folks, that look like me, that are abusing it, that doing that. So again, kind of like if the nonprofit approach, and if people can get around that, it's like, and even an altruistic, not-for-profit approach, for-profit business, like there's nothing wrong with that. But that manner of like, how do we make it most acceptable and available to the most number of people? So outcomes becomes the other thing. It's like, ultimately, it's like, what is your outcome? If you're wanting it to be, I control, I want to have this, I want to make money, which is great. Hey, if that's what you want to do. But you're also not necessarily being part of the solution about addressing what really needs mental health crisis. How do we get all of it? And you don't have to have, some diagnosis to be addressing, end of life. How does that, so much that's out there. And so that's what I would like to kind of challenge people is, as they're thinking about their direction in their businesses, is think about your outcomes, and you could have it both. And even equity comes into a lot of it, where I see is kind of like, ultimately comes down to, how do we make this not something that's just going to be for rich people? And what demographically, who is it going to be? It's going to be for rich, older white people, and that is not where necessarily all the mental health, crisis is. It should be accessible, for everybody. So how do we make sure that is there? And I think if, might be sidestepping a little bit, but people that, like, a lot of questions I get in around people who are like, oh, we want this to be equitable and we want to have equity. But then it's like, but you're doing it in a token manner. You're saying, oh, look, I have this person here. Look, we're equitable, or we're going to create a fund and we're going to help somebody underserved. And so you helped one person, and it's like, oh, yay, great for that one person who, it's more comparison like, hey, they just won the lottery so they can improve their mental health, instead of it being like, how do we really make it accessible? And so like Measure 109 in Oregon has a lot of these, challenges around it, so it's like, yay, we have mental health, we have this Oregon Psilocybin Services that's providing this structure, but it's like, yay, but then also nothing about it is really addressing, it's not mental health therapy, even though everybody calls it mental health therapy, because it's actually said to be like, there's zero clinical that's around it. But they put the onus on, and again, I might be sidetracking, put the onus of the equity on the individuals having to start the companies that are doing that. And then it's like, but that's not their mojo. That's not where they're at. Or these things are like, oh, look, we did something, or we benefited a company. But it's like, oh, you helped one person, or maybe 5 people got out that. What about, the thousands of people that really, really, really need it? And so what I'd like to see is more of kind of like these conversations coming to the table. And I think that's where nonprofits can really be the leaders in pushing that out there, is that, I changed legislation in the past. I would love to continue to be able to, do that. But it's like, hey, look at who I have as a community. I have everybody behind me that I'm representing. I'm not representing stakeholders. numbers. I'm
Hmm.
not representing a patent. I'm not representing, I'm not a lobbyist. I'm not going for, like, I really don't care who you are. We may not sit down and have a drink together or, something, but, so that's where it's like, let's change that narrative together. Let's be the community together that's really aligning it. And that's where we kind of want to go with PATA, is that, these are broad scoping, but it's like getting it is like, let's collaborate. There's no competition between guides and therapists. They each have their own role. Every guide is, hey, it's great. Just don't be the 21-year-old guide that says you're a mental health therapist when you have a high school degree, because that hurts the safety of the ongoing. And, another thing that I get into is even like the terms that we use and the semantics to it. It's like trip. Well, like, what does that mean? It's like, no, it's an experience, like all these connotations that you bring in, or like your messaging that you're doing. If you're all in the psychedelic waves, it's like, that's very intimidating for many people, because you're going to bring up those stereotypes, especially, people death, dying, and older people, generations that, including our generation, that is kind of like, you see that and your immediate thing is like, well, you think of the 60s and the fun and all that. And that's like, hey, that was great, but that has nothing to do with this wave. So change the narrative of it, start using different terms, start using things that are not like, if we all keep going back to these and everybody thinks that all of us that are doing psychedelics are seeing pink elephants, and that equates to therapy. And it's like, whoa, like, you're totally wrong. So how do we switch this? Sorry.
No, it's perfect. I think that's all relevant. There's something to be said about language, especially when we begin talking about therapy or patterns or, mental health. I think all those things are relevant and they all play a role. And, let me shift gears here and ask you this question, which I think is relevant. In your opinion, do you think that the mental health in the 21st century, is it getting worse? Are we seeing, we seem to see it everywhere. It's on television, it's in our communities. Is mental health getting worse, or is it that we just have more increased awareness about it now? What do you think?
I would say both, because
Well
the
said.
acceptance of mental health, like, I'm a completely functional person. I can speak in front of people and I don't, have any issues. My PTSD and, anxiety, I can be standing in a grocery store line and somebody stands too next to me and I'm like, irritating. So,
Yeah.
it's like I'm functional. And what is mental health? Death and dying, spirituality is still it could be a mental health thing. It could be like, oh, I'm exploring my spirituality. And the other, it could be like, well, my spirituality is like off the rockers right now. How do I deal with this? I'm thinking. So it's like the definition of like mental health is everything around there. And I think the challenge is really this, bombardment that we get of, oh, you need to be concerned with this, and we're already over inundated with everything. It's like, oh, how am I supposed to parse through all the political stuff that's going on, the government worrying about whether or not, mortgages, or what am I going to be able to do? Some of these things are, admit are very, privileged things to be able to say. But it's all different, and it's all valid. I'm not religious. I'm highly spiritual, so that's why I think it's the combination, but it's I would say maybe it would be interesting to look at more what the effects of it are, is that when you have how many people are having more anxiety or addressing it, you feel more comfortable with it. And then if there's alternatives, is that like, hey, yeah, it's like my mental health could be talking with my best buddy. It could be going to a therapist. It could be talking with somebody else. It could be walking in nature. It could be, I just need to smoke a joint every night and be able to chill, all of those things. And where I kind of put the precipice on is, as you said, is this like, if it affects the people's quality of life, then that really is an issue, because quality of life doesn't have to be how many cars you have. Do you even have a car? Do you even have a home? I know people that have a ton of money and they're miserable. And, I've talked with people on the streets who, have their issues, and they're also completely content. And so it's like, what are we imposing on there? And maybe this is getting more into the question of like, what do we as a Western civilization say is the mental health issue? Like, do you need to have a home? Do you need to do that? Do I need to live in a, 5-bedroom house? It's like, no. So it's really, and that's what I feel like it's about what the individual wants. And let's get rid of the biases of all this other stuff. Republican, Democrat, who cares? If you're a military veteran, and even if you don't support, the wars that they went through, these people are suffering. Like, why should they be committing suicide? This is, it's just like, there's so much more to that it's like the answer, I feel like all the times that it's like the answer is just yes. Because if it matters to you, because then that's what like really like where are we going with our generation? It's like our kids. We need to take care of our kids. How do we do that? How do we be productive? How do we not, how do I not pass on the messed up things that happened in my life, onto the future? How do we instill their success? Yeah, it's really such a complex, because definitions, right? So like, oh, do you have a mental health issue? No, I do not. And it's like, oh, I do. Like, so what?
Yeah.
What is it? 1 in 4? They say 1 in 4 people are dealing with, really mental health issues. That's a lot. Hundreds of millions, billions of people worldwide. And now that is probably even, when you get into where the bulk of the populations, are and their struggles that aren't even within our Western realm. Sorry, I was kind of getting off into other topics, but, where I'd say one of the things within the therapy realm that we see, that we're trying to change the narrative on is even like, well, one, what is therapy? There's the common use, and we do this comparison of like, you have capital T therapy, lowercase therapy, and therapeutic. Therapy isn't a protected term. A therapist isn't a protected term. So people say that, oh, I'm doing therapy, but their common thing that when you say, hey, I'm going to see my therapist, you're going to see your licensed mental health provider. You're not going to see, your whoever else. Some people might be, but the vast majority, and I think that's where we need to put in the lens of what does everybody else think, not the 100th of a percent that you and I are within the realm, and that many people are. It's around what everybody else is, and that's hey, retail therapy, right? But that's not therapy. And then therapeutic, there's therapeutic values. So like, are we using that across the board, and are people using that? And so one of my probably largest irks within the industry right now is when they hear like Oregon has a psilocybin therapy program, and it's like, no, there's no therapy. It could be used in a therapeutic context. And why that matters is, client safety is that people throw out these terms because, hey, it's good, right? It's sexy. It'll get me more money. It'll get me in here and I can use it. But what about the people going into this? And, I'll use myself as an example. I'm 6'4". I'm 260 pounds. I'm a trained black belt. I've been trained to do things to people. I'm a very gentle, nonviolent man. But if you're somebody like me and you had a false pretense, and I came in thinking I was getting more, and I had an experience, right? Even bad experience, right? There's no bad experience. That's another connotation of the 60s. It's a beneficial experience no matter what. And I have a reactive thing. Are you able to do that? And do you want to deal with me, in an altered state? Big difference between like, oh, holding my hand and coming up and holding my hand would be very triggering. So are we like, or do you guys have the, in the community out there is like, do you have the wherewithal to really identify that? It's like, are you going to come at me? I've heard these things. It's like, oh, somebody gets violent and you just help them with a pillow. And I'd be like, that would freak me out. So what are you going to do with like combat veterans that are even, dealing more issues? It's like, these are the folks that need it. And these are the folks that we get emails to that are asking for questions, are asking for this. So this concept of therapy. And then, what about, people that are dealing with, a sexual trauma, again, a little handheld. And so that's where it's like, hey, guides and sitters and all these, it's like, you're awesome what you're doing, but we also need to know our boundaries. Just like therapists, they need to know their boundaries. We all need to do it. but it's us working together, because it's like we have this ideal thing is like, wouldn't it be awesome if therapists and the guides could work together to really discuss what would be the best thing. And one of the, sorry if I'm going a little off topic,
Not at all.
I feel like this kind of is in there, that when we talk with therapists about like, hey, what is their, what's your hesitations? And, they'll be like, oh, like set and setting and these intention things. And it's like, well, and it made me realize there's kind of a dual track of definitions. And so for, a guide or a sitter, when you're getting into set and setting, you're talking about the structural, the logistics, set and setting, as well as some of the, mental health. But it's like for therapists, you don't need to worry about because that's where the licensure issue comes from. It's like, you don't need to worry about how is the dose coming, what form, that's not imperative. That's not their role. What they need to focus on is that the set and setting from their point of view is the mental health preparation. And all of this is the stuff that's legal because of harm reduction. So it's like, you could talk about your intention setting, hey, Jason, what's going to be your intention going into this? I understand that you're looking to explore psychedelic assisted therapy. You don't have to discuss anything. What's going to be intention? Because we've been discussing this, and this. So be sure when you're going in there that this is what's coming in. And then if they can take and relate that to their person, to be like, this is what I want to talk about. This is what I want to focus on. So this way the guide can keep on putting it down in there. But then you don't need to worry about all of the logistics, because that's what these professionals are for. It's like, then you just really need to be prepared for the integration aspect. I'm doing a little timeline, so the integration aspect of after the dose, right? So even that, integration for mental health therapists is all about that, really that strong mental health, really diving in. Integration, designed around organ psilocybin services, and what some guides and sitters will be is just really a post follow-up, that directive, non-directive types of questions. And so it's like, how do we as the community really make sure that, it's that we're talking about the same things, even though we might have different approaches, or that, as a therapist, it's like, no, you don't need to talk about dosage at all. You don't need to get any of that, because you're a trained mental health. Keep it within the mental health. Let the other professionals deal with it. And then you are on the other side. And there's a great segue between, integration of the person that just, did the experience with the clients, helping them process, and then knowing that boundary of hey, this is a pretty serious issue. I'm not going to get out of my bounds, even though I understand that I'm a very wise person and people have tremendous knowledge, but it's certain issues should be more towards, especially if that's the outcome that the client is looking for.
No, it's beautiful. No, it's good. I want to bring up, because we began talking about definitions and words and therapy and capital T, lowercase t, all these ideas of therapy. I think the way I see something emerging, and I'm curious if you see this emerging. There's all these loaded terms when we think about therapy. When you think about therapy, you think about solving a problem that somebody has, and it's PTSD, and that puts people in this box, right? But what if, because everything you're describing to me, I think there's a better word for therapy, and I think that's called optimization. And I think if I come to you, Jason, for an optimization session, now all of a sudden, I'm not a person that has a giant problem that could freak out and lose it. I'm a person coming to you to make my life even better than it was. And they're almost congruent, but optimization is a more colorful, a more robust pattern that sits on top of therapy. So and I think you could really change the game, especially as a nonprofit. I think you could find yourself in a position where you're optimizing people's performance versus solving a problem. Because if I come to you for therapy, it's already a given that you should be a little afraid of me because I have a problem. But if I'm coming to you for optimization, then now that wipes away a lot of these problems of this person may come at me with a pillow, or, let's just take that out by calling it optimization. And I think people would want to go to an optimist instead of going to a therapist. And it just seems like a better way. And here's even another part that I was thinking about, and it's relevant because the first wave to me is getting better. The first wave is therapy. The second wave is optimization. And people have money to pay for optimization. The rich white guy that, like me, that lives in Hawaii, that wants to get some neurofeedback with his psilocybin session to figure out what part of my amygdala is being stimulated after 9 grams. Like, I want to figure this stuff out, man. This is important to me. Like, I'm going to pay extra for that versus my friend who came back from Iraq and lives under a bridge. But my money, the money I give you for my optimization session, could be leveraged back to pay for someone's ibogaine session. You know what I mean? So the optimization could pay for the therapy. And I think you could, it's not really putting people in boxes, but it's just putting people on different tracks, because eventually therapy leads to optimization. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I think that's a really fascinating, way of thinking about it. And, what kind of, the first thing that came into my mind was just these negative connotations, with like therapy. And even, it's like, I'm married to a therapist, she's an awesome therapist.
Yeah, of course.
With, I have 2 sisters and they're both PhDs, and then it's like, yeah, right. In one manner or another. And even our friends, like talking with you, it's like all of, this stuff. And so it's like, it's so complex. And, it's like, yeah, there's these words. And where I kind of question is like, yeah, that's great. It's like, I love the optimization. That's a way of doing it. But the challenge that I see is like, what, and this is where I kind of like flip it. Okay, now let's flip it to look from what the consumers are, the clients, the public, everybody in the world, are they going to get that? And
they have to, because they are told what to get. And we, as people in charge, are setting the standard for what care people are going to get. That's what it kind of sucks to say it like this, but the medical industry dictates to people what they have. They dictate their problem. They dictate their medicine. And so if we want to flip the game, that's how it's been. And, I'm not saying we can't change it, but I think we change it from the bottom up. It's if we allow for the continued medicalization, the top down, like you had recently posted an article about medicalization being a sort of soft prohibition, right? I thought that was fascinating. And right, like that's pretty impressive. So if we use that method, like let's just get rid of all that. Like we don't need, just push it right to the side. Hey, by the way, why don't you come in for our optimization session? Like that's just it's just a better policy, I think.
Yeah, and I think it puts a really in just the premise of premise of that is that we're kind of it's like we do have to change the narrative, and so it's like and I would say that we butt up against and the industry and all is like it's almost like this it's Western versus Eastern. It's like no, it's not but what are the terms and how do we it's like how do we buck some of the system? Well, still it's also like the system's there. Right. And we need to we're not going to compete against the billion trillion dollar industry that we're up against, but we could change. And I think I feel what's missing within the industry as a whole, from my perspective in conversations, is we all kind of have very similar beliefs. There might be, some little things, but when we kind of shave it down, it's like we're there. We believe in the power of psychedelics. We believe that, psychedelics have a therapy. There's so much that's in there. We believe in accessibility. We believe in equity. We believe in all of that. And we believe that we also want to be able to live lives, in there. So it's like, if we do it one off, it's like, oh, I like this term. You like this term.
Yeah.
You do this term. It doesn't help moving forward. And I'm not necessarily saying I have a solution for this. That we need to have more cohesion. And I think that with the, if you just look at the timeline of this wave of psychedelics is, it's been going on, the wave started and we're kind of in this, and it's still going to keep going. So, it's like in some way we're dealing with all of, the precursor waves, but we need to make a change. And it's almost like, I feel like the challenge to us as a community and the literal challenge that I would put out to everybody is like, if we're going to change the narrative, let's do it together. Let's do it with people, it's like let's create the large table that doesn't include organizations that want to patent psilocybin assisted therapy so that it means their thing under a Western model and it can't be used, anyplace else, right? Or that it has to be done through a synthetic, and it's like, hey, great, if someone wants to take a synthetic, go for it. That would be awesome. But do you really need it? It's kind of, so it's like, how do we, and what I would love to see is, and I've been talking with more organizations, is like, it's almost like this think tank thing to be like, let's throw out all these words. Optimization. What do we like? What do we don't like? Like we started off using the word consumer, and we like the double pun, right? It's like people are right, but then it's also you're consuming, right? So it was kind of fun. But then, it was like, oh, but people have these, connotations of consumer, meaning purchasing in the for-profit realm. And it's like, oh, well, that's really good. So we're thinking of a new term, but it's like, well, what's that term going to be? I can't just pull it out and then be like, okay, everybody else is going to understand that. But collectively, if we could all be, hey, let's start agreeing that a bunch of us are going to start using these terms and redo it, that would be, I don't have the solutions to it, but I'm sure if a bunch of us got together, we could start doing it. That would include the Western, include the Eastern. That's not like you're bad, these types of things that happens within the psychedelic communities where everybody starts, oh, this model isn't. And it's like, let's move beyond that and really start talking about the solutions to it instead of always being reactive. The answer is like, let's start being proactive. Let's us within the communities be the ones that are going to redefine what this wave is and have the collective ability that when somebody comes in and be like, oh, I want to take this and I want to patent it, we're all going to be pushing against this. We're all going to be going into legislature and being like, all of us that are serving these communities, and look how many thousands of people that I have behind me, and all of these that are your constituents, by the way, right? And that, like there's so much power in that we don't have individually. Like our few thousand people that are, within our community directly that I'm aware of, and somebody else's few thousand people will compete against. We can make that change if we're doing it. But the challenge is that it's so much is going on and everybody's trying to figure out how do we do that. But I would love, and I would challenge anybody out there, if you like that, is like, let's talk about that. It's independent of PATA. These are things that need to be done. There's all these tremendously smart people. Let's start doing that. Let's make the change. Let's be the ones that are going to be changing that narrative, even if it's not a huge thing. Like we're never going to compete with the Western model. It's not going to change.
What would be the first topic? Like, let's say we got together like a group of 10 influential people. What would be the first topic that you would want to discuss at that meeting?
That's really great. I'm going to process this through.
Yeah, of course.
A little bit thing that you talked about earlier, but like the building the ground up, and what I kind of do within the consulting and within nonprofits is that I talk about this. You need to find your tip of the pyramid. And none of this is like, ooh, I've never thought about this before. But then it's like, oh yeah, I forgot about this. This is exactly right. It's like, you need to find your top of the pyramid. Where are you going to? You need to find your North Star, right? Getting back to the maps analogy, setting sail. They weren't just like, okay, we're pushing off and we're just going to head in this direction. It's like, that's the North Star. We know if we head in that direction, or we're going to use that as our reference point. We need to come together to figure is like, what's going to be the piece, and I would think it probably falls in the realm of the ultimate solution is, if psychedelics were just, completely legal, removed from any schedules, where people could use it for their own things, like that would be like, if we could get there, that's a long process. There'll be a lot of stages, and then, so figuring that out collectively. What do we want it to be? Accessibility. Do we want to be, and I think there's things that then fall underneath there, which would probably be like accessibility, destigmatizing, coming into, terms of like, really, what do we want psychedelics to be from all of us? I'm mental health focused. It shouldn't just be what I think. I don't have the answers. you and I, and somebody else and somebody else and somebody else. And we kind of parse through and figure that out, figure out some of the key things. And then we go to the bottom. And then we work up because we know where we're going. Because what happens to many organizations, nonprofits, is that they start here, because, the person will be like, oh, I want to do this. And they have this big, broad scoping, and then programs develop like this. And so then they're not going to either. And so you have two great ideas, but they don't benefit each other. And we're using different things. And then it comes to the point of like, oh no, I'm trying to make my hands balanced here. Oh no, like, well, what do? We got to get rid of this one because now this is the track that we're going, but we wasted all these time and these resources. And so as a community, if we could be, all pushing off from the old world to the new world, but we're heading in the right direction and we're going to get there. I could have a sailing ship, somebody else could have a rolling ship, somebody else could have a steamboat or a jet engine, but we're all going to get there. And we're all going to the same place. And, we're working together. And I've had a couple conversations, lately around this kind of like more and more of this concept of the old boys club. And there's a great article I saw on, LinkedIn. Well, this organization has been promoting itself as, Women in Psychedelics, collective. And one of their things is like, let's change it from the old, boys club into, this, I forgot the term that they use, but this like super women's network. And it's like kind of like, yeah, let's start changing out of this, because even within psychedelics now, it's like a few people get all of the attention. Right. And it's like, oh, you got Rick Dublin or, Paul Stamets. And it's like, those guys are awesome. But it's like, there's so many other people.
Yeah.
It's like, why do we keep falling back to the same people? Let's expand out. Let's get some of these new voices in. Are we doing this because that's the sellable thing? A couple of these people became, sexy and intriguing, and you get their knowledge and your things. And hey, I'm trying to do those too. It's like, I'm trying to connect with these people. But, it's like, let's also start celebrating some of these others. Like, these women's networks is, the people of color, psychedelic, collective, all of these that, like they're in this process. They're like, we don't want a seat at the table. We want to create our own table, and it's like, that's awesome. It's like, let's expand it out there, because if we really are going to be equitable, there's all of these other issues that we need to address that need to be a part of that. And it's kind of like, let's start spreading some of the wealth. And within the nonprofit world, it happens a lot, of like, hey, once you get to a certain level, you just get so much money. If you look at what like Harvard and these huge schools, they bring in millions of dollars and get millions of dollars or donors, and they're sitting on billions. Yeah. And they're still asking for money. And then it's like, hey, here I am, a nonprofit as an example. But so, it's like, I've put in a lot of money into this and a lot of time, and it's like, hey, how about, shifting it over to some of the other people that are doing, shifting that so that we can be a part of spreading this out. Because otherwise, the folks with the money are really controlling the direction of where they go. MAPS is an awesome organization, but there's a lot more than MAPS out there. Yeah. There's a lot. And so, it's just, all these things start to kind of like wrap back into the same issues of like, we need to expand, the psychedelics about mind expansion and getting rid of the ego. And it's like, well, why aren't we like, let's do that, like get rid of our egos on this, expand it. We're all in the same direction, spread it out. So there's new knowledge that we can come up with these new terms or these new ways that are going to make it more accessible. It's going to make it more approachable. And that, hey, whatever you want to use psychedelics for, it's like, as long as it's safe and responsible, I don't care. Go have fun with it. But if we don't do that, we're going to miss out on the ultimate thing is that a lot of people need this. And like, it's pitiful that people are, committing suicide or wanting to do that, or the challenges, I've been in those areas myself, it's like, this is insane, that we should do this. The limitation is us collectively. It's not that we can't, because there's a tremendous, knowledge base out there. And organizations, like your podcast that are just, that are doing this, they're helping to expand people's minds. And so it's like, let's now collectively get together and move forward. That's what I'd kind of like to see is this next step is like, get
Yeah.
together, collaboration, partnerships, move it forward, change the road into what we want to do. But it's all of us deciding on where it goes, not just me, not just you, not just somebody else.
Yeah, that's really well said. And I feel like we're just kind of scratching the surface, Jason, because I think we can really, I think you and I can continue to talk for another 2 hours and start to build out a framework. So you'll have to come back and we'll have to make it like a series where we come in and we find some time to talk about the issues of the day. And I have some ideas that I want to talk to you about once we get off. But for now, before I let you go, why don't you tell me what you got coming up, where people can find you, where they can get your free book and the free resource you guys are offering. Talk a little bit about that, and then what you're excited about.
Great. Well, I'm excited about so many things in this industry and in there that I'll try not to dwell too much on that. So Psilocybin Assisted Therapy Association, we're a national 501c3 nonprofit, all volunteer run. I'm not making any money. There's my partner, nobody in it, with volunteers. www.pata-us.org. Or if you just, search us, we're out there. And we have two great resources out there. One of them is a free self-assessment test. So it's a psilocybin assisted therapy, a self-assessment test. So it helps somebody figure out, like, should I have a mental health therapist with me or not? Really depending on where their answers are, and also being like, hey, you may not realize you need one now, but maybe think about it, or being aware of where, what does that mean? So help to kind of guide the direction into somebody of like, do you just want to take psilocybin by yourself or, with your friend, or do you want to do it with a guide, or you want to have a therapist involved? Kind of helps them steer in that direction. Free online tool. And then we have our PAT guidebook for consumers, which they're going to be changing the name from consumers to something else, or just the guidebook, but for the general public. And we created, it's a 45-page document that really gets into what is psilocybin assisted therapy, and then pros and cons. Like, why would you want to have a therapist involved? Why would you not? Like, what can they do? What can they not do? Hey, Oregon Psilocybin Services is awesome. What can they do? What can they not do? Guides and sitters are awesome. What can they do? What can they also do? As well as, you could do this by yourself. Safety issues, whatnot. It's not as complex, but really that based around education, empowering to do so that they can figure out where they want. Downloaded a lot. We have MDs, organizations, therapist guides that just use this on a regular basis. And that's what we wanted it to do, is what we designed it to do, was that, hey, if you're not sure, like either, hey, I'm a therapist, somebody says that they're interested in psilocybin assisted therapy, I can't talk to you about it, or I'm not comfortable at this time because I haven't figured out where my gray areas are. Here's a resource that explains it. You're a guide and you don't know about therapy. Here's a resource. And then we're going to be expanding on there and providing more resources. We want to make it that consumer information is free. And then as we're developing more information for therapists, it'll probably have a fee to it, just so that we can be sustainable with that. We are looking for donations. Everything that we get right now, 100% is going back in to make sure that we can continue to provide these free resources. And, I would love for everybody to take a look at it.
Yeah.
And this was also resources. If you were a consumer and you're like, hey, my doctor doesn't know anything about it, or my therapist, hand them this book.
Yeah.
And where we're going in the future, in that we're like funds being raised and some other really cool ideas that I have that I probably won't say at this time, is to have the really entry level information. Because if you look on the scale of, like, there's so many organizations that have these incredible programs, $10,000, and you go through a year program, and it's like, well, not everybody needs that, and most people can't afford it. What if we did on the opposite end, introductory level? How do we get more therapists involved? How do we get more consumers? So really, that's our area, and then that they can feel empowered to go where they want to go. Because an absolute honest, answer would be like, hey, if somebody uses our information and they're like, I don't want to take psilocybin, I'm not ready to take psilocybin, psychedelics, great.
Yeah.
May change in the future, but at least you felt like you had an option to determine what it was. So that's where we're going. And what we're looking for support on is that we want this to be out there. We want everybody to understand, and we want to be a part of, like, our model is based on collaboration. We want to get in touch with everybody. I provide these free services for nonprofit psychedelics to be a part of that. No quid pro quo, because I want you to be successful. So all of that is really, like, we're trying to be that, really leading by an example. And just more people know about us, the more that they can spread out our information, the better it allows us to keep going. Our limitation is not from opportunities. I mean, a video, project, these intense training programs. We're talking about a conference, but it's there's only so much, Lisa and I can do, even with our volunteers. So it's just like volunteers sharing our information, talking with us. Let's collaborate. Let's come up with the solutions. And let's then, lastly, I'd say, let's start seriously talking about this kind of, think tank or large table, and let's start making these changes that we're all talking about, but we're not doing it because it's overwhelming. Collectively, let's do it together.
Yeah, I like that. Sometimes the idea that paralyzes people is just that the idea is too big and there's no first step to take, right? But once you take that first step, it's like, okay, now I can take another one. Now I can take another one. Ladies and gentlemen, go check out the website. The links will be in the show notes. Jason and his team are giving out some free resources. I would highly recommend people go and do some research for yourself. Check out the book. Reach out to Jason. He's an amazing guy to talk to. He is passionate about helping people, and I'm looking forward to further conversations. And check out the resources, everybody. You got to see him here. We're going to be learning a little bit more about his education, Empower and Heal, in the months coming up. And there's a lot to come. So thank you all for tuning in today. I really appreciate it. Check out all the free resources, ladies and gentlemen. It's my favorite my 4-letter word that begins with F is free, right? So thank you, everybody. That's all we got for today. Okay.
Thank you, George.
Yeah. Hang on one second, Jason. I'm going to talk to you for a moment, but I'm going to hang up here.